Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Recover You. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Kylene. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Why are you laughing?
Well, just because we had a little restart moment.
Yeah.
It's good. We're good.
Yep.
We're going to roll with it.
Yeah.
Okay, today we are going to talk about modesty again. We talked about this a few weeks ago. We will link that episode in the show notes. We will also link a lot of resources today as well. So definitely, if what we're talking about resonates with you, definitely check the show notes after the episode. But the reason we are specifically doing this episode is because after the one we did on modesty, we got a question that came in around parenting and raising up children with the right education and supporting them around their self-worth and that sort of thing. And so we're going to kind of break that down and share as much as we can kind of around that within the time constraints of one episode. But what I wanted to sort of start with is this idea that we are not parenting experts. We are parents, and we have made a lot of mistakes, and we have really learned a lot from those mistakes. We've also done a lot in terms of investing in our own personal growth, whether that's courses or different education or mentorships or trainings or certifications or books or podcasts or whatever. We've just spent a lot of time really growing. And we've mentioned this a bajillion times on the podcast. A lot of the things we've learned about parenting, we learned later in Keegan's adolescent life. So 16 plus, right? So some of the things we're going to be sharing are things that we've learned that can be helpful much earlier that we wish we had applied. And there's also a lot of things that we've learned from people that are much more expert than us.
Well, and what's interesting too, and everybody has their own unique situation. So in our situation, as it relates to Keegan, I was his dad, single dad through about 7 or 8. So you weren't even in the picture with him. And in that cycle of me raising him by myself, I was so overwhelmed because of what was happening in my previous relationship that, we were just having fun. I wasn't thinking through, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't thinking through well, I'm going to educate him on it was like I was surviving from day to day. So, the important thing is you learn these things. I think the thing I would say is that, our education with Keegan, our being able to talk through really started deeply at discovery. So he was already 16. So it's not too late though. It's never too late to really, get better at having these conversations with your kids, maybe even your adult kids. You know what I mean? Like, as you learn things, like, it's really okay. Like, I think genuinely people realize when you're moving towards them with in the spirit of like knowledge and grace, and you want to grow people's, it's kind of like, hey, if I have knowledge that I think would benefit you, I can kindly bring it up. You may decide, in the case of your adult children, they may decide that they don't want to hear it, but you've got something for them. So anyway, I just want to make sure that it's like, if you don't start at age 1, it's not too late, right? There's, you can intervene at any point.
Well, and to that point, I think too, like I said, we did a lot of things wrong in terms of we didn't have really in-depth conversations about all the things that we're going to talk to you about today that would have been very beneficial.
Yes.
But some of the things that and I also had a lot of head explosions because I hadn't done a lot of my own healing work. Mm-hmm. But I think that some of the things that we did well that then allowed what we did later to actually have some sort of an impact is a couple things that we've sort of, I think, seen that you can make mistakes when these things are present. It helps the kids. And that is, we even way before this, we would apologize. Like when we would have a head explosion or when we felt like we went overboard with something or got too upset about something or did something wrong as a parent, we would apologize.
Right.
And we both did that. And then creating an environment where your child knows that they can come to you. And Keegan primarily did that with you. He had a really deep bond, but I think there were probably times too where he would come to me with some things. But if it was extra vulnerable, he would definitely come to you. But creating an environment where your kids feel safe with one or both of you, hopefully both, but where they can come if something is confusing or something is scary, or they just know it's going to be safe. Like, hey, I'm kind of, and so if you create an environment where your kid knows that they're loved and that you are fallible and apologize, and that they can come have conversations with you, those are some of the things I think that we tried really hard to foster, that then allowed, even though we were sort of late in the game talking about some of the more vulnerable, intimate things, that that he was more receptive to still, even though it was late in the game.
Right.
So, quote unquote late. I mean, 16 is still young, but
Yeah.
but we only have our kids until 18 usually. So
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be using a lot of tools and techniques. I'm just going to be really upfront. A lot of this is from Rodney and Tracy Wright. Again, I'll probably attach their episode in the show notes as well. They have the book, How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex. So we've been heavily influenced from a lot of their content. I recently went through the parent training course from Pure Desire, which again was led and I think mostly created by I literally just said their names and it just blanked. Rodney and Tracy Wright.
She needs a Sunday afternoon nap.
Oh, yeah. I'm a little off my game today. But yeah, Rodney and Tracy Wright ran the parent training course. I would recommend it. There's also another course, but I'm going to talk about those at the end, so I won't go too much into it now. But I just want to kind of clarify. A lot of these recommendations are, again, either things that we've learned from ourselves or recommended by other people, or things that we have seen work, or things we wished we did. So that's kind of where all this is coming from. So let's start with the question that was submitted. It was, I really appreciate your and Patrick's episode on modesty culture. I had never thought about it before, and it was very insightful. As a mom of a daughter, and as someone who grew up in purity culture and just until recently was completely naive to pornography and all it entails, I would love some help finding the words to use to teach my daughter the self-love and self-worth found in Christ. I struggle with those concepts myself, and I was never taught any of that, so I'm clueless how to even start to talk about it with her when she starts getting to that age, and even laying the foundation at a young age of self-value. Could you maybe do an episode on how to start teaching at age-appropriate levels from childhood to teenhood, and give listeners concepts and or phrases to use to make sure we raise our daughters healthily? Yes, that's what we're going to do today. So Thank you for submitting that. I love doing episodes that are very specialized for the listeners and answering specific issues that you're going through. I think that's really a fun opportunity for us. So thank you for sending that in. Okay, so I'm going to start with just some phrases, and then we're going to move into some deeper concepts that I think will kind of help in general. One phrase that Patrick uses all the time, and we try to incorporate with Keegan, is "I love you because you're you." And again, I think we stole that from Rodney. I think we stole that. I don't know if you did that before you heard him speak.
It's certainly a post-discovery thing that I started doing. But I think it comes out of, to be honest, it comes out of like, I'm probably heard somebody say it, but it really comes out of like the message of Christ, and how it's like grace is just, hey, you can't do anything to earn this. You've already earned it. You know what I mean? And so it's like, as a parent, that's a really wonderful gift that we can give our kids. Yeah.
And I think, this is one of those things that you start really early in life, right? You say, I love you just because you're you. And the reason that's so important is because it disconnects behaviors from value. So if a child is misbehaving, or if a child gets a C on a test, or if they do something that you don't like, or they do something that they feel guilty about, they're not going to, over time, they're going to learn that that's not associated with your love for them. So like if they do something bad or hurtful or accidental, or they make a mistake, or whatever, they still know that you love them. And how do they know that? Two ways. You say it a lot and reinforce that, and maybe even reinforce it, especially when they do something wrong. You have a conversation around that behavior, and then you reiterate, hey, I just want to remind you I love you no matter what. And then your actions, always show that too. Like just consistently coming towards them, even when, or especially when there's some disconnect, there's some conflict.
Yeah. I think it's
and that's something, I'll be honest, that's something that I was not really good about, and had to really, when I worked through a lot of my trauma stuff and learned about communication more deeply, that's an area that I wish I could have done earlier better.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, we don't get that from our parents, right? Like it's, actually, let me rephrase this. Our parents probably felt that way, but based on like it's the example of every time you get into the car when they pick you up from school, what do they say? How was school today? Did you get any grades back? Right?
Bless you.
Thank you. So that just sends the message that it doesn't matter how you're feeling. It's matter. Your performance is what matters. And so we don't do that in a sense to wound our children. We're just genuinely interested because we want to help them and maybe keep track and follow up and control because its parents were leaders and there's all those good things. But yeah, it is a long-term consistent message because Keegan shared some things with us that like, what did I say to him? This is interesting. I said to him one time, I said, Keegan, I was so glad that you and I were so tight, as you were younger because life was really, really hard for me. And thank goodness you were there, right? Because it was such a bright spot for me to be able to be there with you and all of these different things. And then you and I met, and he assumes this thing that I no longer needed him. So it's just, kids are going to take these messages. And I remember he said that too, and I was horrified because I never said, I don't need you anymore. Yeah. It was just like...
You meant it as in you brought so much value and purpose and motivation into my life in a time where you were like the shining light in my life.
That's right.
Not
that's
as in like you were responsible to keep me together and like,
Yeah, now I don't need you. But that's how he received it. Yeah. So those are it's just interesting.
He had some really interesting interpretations around that kind of stuff.
He did.
Because there was a period of time where there was a vulnerable conversation where he, because I always, when we got married and everything, it was like, okay, well, I'm choosing this family, right? And we had a thing at our wedding where I read this thing to Keegan, and it was like, I can't remember exactly how I worded it, but basically, like, I'm choosing you. I love you. I'm going to view you as my child. I'm going to treat you that way. Like, that I just was really intentional about that, and it was years later, and there was something that he said, there was some experience that he was having, and it sort of boiled down, and it was basically like, from his perspective, it was like, I didn't want him. He was in the way of like me being in a relationship with you or something like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, Keegan, like, view it the other way, view it like I'm choosing you, like you're part of the package and I chose that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so he had some really interesting wounding as well. And I think, we're kind of getting off topic a little bit, but all kids are going to have that. They're going to have these different perspectives, right? So, and we're always going to make mistakes in how we word something or how we communicate something. So if we can pick a couple things like this that we can reiterate consistently over time and then really work on reiterating it over and over and over, hopefully, it will get absorbed, right? I love you because you're you. There's nothing you could do or not do that changes that. And just, I really, really mean that.
Yeah. And I've had conversations where I've told him, as recently as a couple months ago, where I'm like, I will always love you. No matter what happens in your life, I'm always going to love you.
Yeah.
And that won't go away until I pass on, but I will always, always love you.
It won't pass away then. It'll get more, probably, if you think about it. Yeah.
I won't be able to say it.
Right, you won't, you'll write it down and he can keep a note for you, okay? The second specific phrase or terminology that might be helpful is things like God made you that way, or you were designed this way, or you're exactly the way you should be, right? Just instilling from a very young age that your essence, your soul, your being, your body, everything about you and who you are is good, is right, is valuable, that, you are made perfectly and designed perfectly. And again, that's this idea of like instilling value instead of, sometimes if we're talking about body parts or when kids are, one of the things they mention in the parent training course is like, we might have a tendency when we're naming all the parts of the body, right? We're going to name the knees. We're going to name the elbows. We're going to point to the nose. It's the nose. And then when we get to private parts, we're going to name them, hoochie coochie, or we have these little, right? So like really using the terminology is going to be really important, but then also using phrases like God made you that way and everything about you is good.
And just to clarify what you're saying by that is a penis is a penis, a vagina is a vagina. Right. I mean, that's what they're saying. Like, don't sugarcoat that with the children, because then it's cutesy names as opposed to, hey,
well,
this,
and
this
we'll
is
talk
what
about
they
that.
are.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that too when we get into some of the concepts a little more deeply, because that actually is really important, really important.
Yeah.
We don't want to gloss over that. We need to name the parts.
Right.
And yeah, so we will revisit that for sure because it's really important. But yeah, so just using phrasing or terminology from a young age that's basically reiterating their value and that there's nothing wrong with them. Like you being you is valuable, and you are made perfectly.
Right.
So I did reach out to Keegan for this episode to see like, hey, and I was asking for feedback. Like, is there anything we did or did not do that helped you build self-confidence? Or, is there anything that you want people to know when it comes to, we're going to do an episode around parents and children and pornography and stuff like that. And he said, well, I really didn't have a lot of self-worth until last year, just to be honest. So, there's that.
Yeah.
That is something that he really, really struggled with. And we really tried to encourage him in that a lot. And it was just a deep wound for him. He got bullied sometimes in high school. He was incredibly smart, but he always felt super insecure. He has red hair, and he always felt super insecure about that. He always had some sort of, I would say, from my perspective, unrealistic image or idea that girls didn't like him or that he didn't have friends. And when we would see him around groups of people, we were like, oh my gosh, so many people like you. And oh my gosh, I think that girl likes you. And he just did not see it. So he had a lot of wounding in high school, and then he had some experiences in college. And then the past year, he's really sort of come into his own. Yeah. So that's probably true. But
I wonder, and this is also probably the broader part of this, is you and I have gotten very healthy as well. And so
that energy, sharing the energy.
That energy, it's like, they always say one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids is to be the healthiest version of you.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot easier to have difficult conversations with your children when you are in a place of really good health, because you're not worried about it. You go in, you're not uptight. You're like, hey, we're going to have this conversation. It's going to be okay. I trust my child. I trust myself. You know what I mean? And so
that's actually what you just said is maybe another phrase to kind of throw in with specific phrases is reiterating early on that your child is capable and intelligent of making good decisions, and kind of building that confidence of like, maybe you don't trust them to like,
drive
make
the car
big decisions
10.
at 4, but
but
like in again, age appropriate ways, just like when those are true, really reiterating those things, finding the positives to really accentuate and reward and verbalize, not in like a narcissistic you can do no wrong way, but in I'm going to make sure that I'm highlighting strengths that you have, right, and it going deeper than maybe physicality or, things like that. Like you're a worthy human.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Keegan did say that that when he replied was, I think that parents of boys don't realize that they figure out what sex is in like elementary school. So I said, yeah, that's like an important thing to know, right? I was in some Bible study or something one time where we watched a video and they were really encouraging you to talk to your kids about pornography. And I got off that video or that call or that meeting, whatever it was, and I had a conversation with him about it. It was literally like the next day he came to me and was like, hey, Mom, somebody showed me a picture at the bus stop. And he was maybe 9. So it is really early. And I thought that was interesting that was one of his first replies, is that I don't think parents realize how young people get exposed.
Well, and I always think about it this way, because in Keegan's case, the bus came and picked up all the kids that were between 2nd and 6th grade, right? So you think about that maturity level between a 6th grader and a 2nd grader, it's a pretty big gap. And so all the kids sit on the buses now like adults do and look at their phones, right? And so maybe the 2nd grader doesn't have a phone, but the 6th grader does, right? So they end up sitting next to each other. And then that's where the lesson starts. So do you want a 6th grader teaching your kid about sex through images of pornography? Or would you like to actually talk to your 2nd grader? So I think that's kind of what's happening. We're hearing more and more of that. The kids are getting exposed on buses by older kids who have smartphones.
Yeah. Well, and I think kids are just curious, right? So if they hear a word, they're going to ask somebody or they're going to Google it, right? So who do we want them to be the source of information when it comes to body parts and sexuality? Right. And if they aren't curious, then maybe it'll save a Google search that comes up with an image, right?
That's right.
So if we can empower them, again, going back to terminology, that's going to be really important. But one of the things he said, he didn't have a lot of criticism that he offered up, but not that it's not there. He just didn't send it. But one thing that he did say was, I think you guys, in a positive way, he said, I just think you guys were generally not super taboo about it, like the topic of sex. So, because I was trying to ask him like what was helpful, what was not helpful. And he's like, well, you guys weren't really taboo about it. So while we could have done way better than we did, I think we did make an effort not to make it like this big, scary secret thing that's not talked about. Like in my house growing up, like, ooh, that was not something to talk about. You just sort of like knew it wasn't something to talk about, right?
Yeah.
We hugged in front of him and kissed in front of him. And like, we tried to make affection like a normal thing in the house and things of that nature. And so we tried not to make it too weird, that it would be uncomfortable. But then again, we've learned that we could have gone a lot deeper. So those were kind of some of his thoughts, not making it taboo. And then realizing like how early people are learning about it. So here are some concepts to move forward to do better than we did. The first one is to really, and you sort of alluded to this a minute ago, is to work on yourself first. Because if you are, so for example, we were talking about the parts and naming them different names, right? Like growing up, and listen, I'm not throwing my parents under the bus. I always have to put this little asterisk in there. I love them. They're amazing people. My mom cannot say the word pee. She's got to call it wee wee. I cannot. To this day, I don't think she can say the word. And that's not even a body part. It's just pee. So anything that you are uncomfortable saying, really check in with yourself. Where did I learn that? Right? Why am I uncomfortable naming things? Like, can I say vagina? Can I say penis? Can I say, can I talk about sex? Anything that we are personally uncomfortable with, if it's going to translate, we're not going to be comfortable talking to our kids about it. Right. And, there's always an aspect of, will we ever be 100% comfortable having those conversations? They're always a little awkward, right? So there's a little bit of like, I'm not saying wait to have a conversation until you're like, this is easy. But I think for so many of us, whether it's terminology or our own relationship to our body or our relationship to ourself or our past or our trauma, or if we were sexually abused, or if we have some sort of pain around these topics, like it's really, I would encourage everyone whenever possible to do some work on that, to work with a therapist or do some self-growth stuff to help you feel resolved and grounded and free from in those areas.
I think too, we've talked about this relative to if you're going through a situation like us where, an addict is discovered and he's starting to heal and, there's betrayal in the house and things like that. Like it is okay to talk to your kids about that. I know that I always encourage the guys in the groups, like talk to your kids about it. Now there's an age appropriate way to do that. But like in Keegan's case, he was 16. So I was able to talk to him about it, right? And there were some miscues that we did, but he saw the process. He saw what I was doing. He saw the damage. And those are really, really important things for people to see. And I think you owe it to your kids when you're going through something to be open and honest, because they know what's happening. They may not know the details, but they know something is going on. And so in my case, I think when I finally started talking to him, because I think it was about 2-ish weeks when I finally kind of sat him down and said, hey, this is what's going on. This is why I'm sleeping in a separate room. And so we started to talk through that and he was like, oh, okay. So it was important. It was an important thing for him to see and hear.
Yeah, I think it's always important to lead by example, right? So again, just anytime we can use these opportunities to work on our own growth and our own healing, it's going to be helpful because then we will be better at passing it on. You don't want there to be a situation where you're so uncomfortable with a topic that needs to be had that you avoid helping your child with that because you feel so uncomfortable with it, right? And I know that happened because I left all of the sex conversations up to you growing up with Keegan.
Yeah.
And then I found all this out, and then I was thinking, what did you share in those conversations or not share or talk about or not talk about? And how healthy or not healthy was that because you were going through your own stuff, right? So we always want to work on our own things. That's the first thing. But moving beyond that, again, we're going to jump into sort of practical application by age. Okay, so how do I talk to my kids? And what is actually age appropriate, right? So how do I communicate from a young age into them being adults? So the first thing is we're going to begin with the terminology. So throw it into regular conversations. You're talking about the body parts. Well, don't skip the body parts. So if you're talking about learning all of the body parts, you're going to teach them words like nipple. You're going to teach them words like vagina. You're going to teach them words like penis. There were several examples in the parent training about why this was important. And there was one that was just really sad. And it was this story of a girl who came up to her mom and said something to the effect of, I wish Bobby would stop poking me with his stick. And so, you hear stick, you think stick, right? Well, if she had the terminology, she would have said penis. And then the mom would have had a very different response and been able to protect her, but she didn't have the terminology. So really important, because when they have the terminology, it helps them communicate more effectively if something is bothering them, or even if they're just like, la da 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 da, I don't know, is that bad, or whatever, but they're telling you something that happened and then you can intervene. Oh, wait, this is happening when you're hanging out with so-and-so, I'm going to need to have a conversation with their parents or ask you some more questions or get curious about what does that mean, right? There were some examples in there too about getting curious. So when you're talking about being age appropriate, not jumping to a conclusion. So if a kid asks a question about what does XYZ mean, not necessarily jumping in with an answer immediately, but asking, well, what do you mean by that? Where did you hear that context? Because there were some, I don't have one on the top of my head, but there were some examples that the child used a word inappropriately, they said it wrong and they were actually asking about something that was totally innocent, and had the parent just jumped in, it would have been a different conversation. So just getting curious when your kids are asking about sex, where did you find out about that? Where did you hear that? What do you mean by that? And then if they really are asking about that thing, going ahead and answering the question. Right. But yeah, so the other reason that terminology is really important is that they actually have found that it's a deterrent for predators. So if there are people that are trying to groom children, but they have been educated about what pornography is, or they have been educated about the names of body parts, then they can go, first of all, communicate to their parents better, but also if they use the language, or they say, oh, that's a penis, or they say, oh, that's porn, or, whatever it is, the groomer, if they see that the child is able to use adult language, then they know that they are being educated in their household. And so it actually is a little bit of a deterrent. Yeah. And how simple is that?
Yep. Very simple.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if that's the one thing we can do, let's do that, you know?
Yeah.
As kids age, so when they're really young, start with body parts, right? We're just going to talk about them. We're going to educate about them. We're not going to shame. We're not going to skip past body parts. We're not going to make it weird. We're not going to be uncomfortable about it. It just is what it is. So when do you do that? When you start naming things, right? You're going to start naming everything. As they begin to age, then you're going to begin to include conversations about sex, about their body, about pornography, and again, age-appropriate ways, but what you'll start incorporating as they get older and they start interacting more with other people is start having conversations around who sees private parts, who's able to touch them, where do you put your hands, where are other people's hands do not go here. What if, you only take baths or showers with, these specific family members, who sees your private parts, right? Like, is there a situation where maybe a doctor would have to see a private part, but mommy would always be in the room with you? Or, there should never be a situation outside of where mom is with you, or, whatever these age appropriate things are based on what is safe for them. Educating them what to say or not to say to other kids, right? Like where their hands go, or, not making fun of or not comparing body parts, with other kids, right? Just kind of talking about like, that's like when you teach your kids what's nice to say and what's not nice to say, right? So it's not that these are bad things, but we're not going to make fun of differences, or, from boy to girl, for example, or girl to boy, or, different things of that nature.
Yeah.
So just all that sort of education about where hands go. There are books all around this topic. So there's the books that we've talked about multiple times, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. There's a junior version for very young kids. And then there's a regular version for, I think it's like, that's maybe for like 8, 9, 10 plus. But the junior version is like under 8. And then there is God Made All of Me. And so that's talking about the body parts. And there's another book series, I think it's called Where Hands Go. And that's sort of the education piece that I was just mentioning as well. So that is sort of, as they age, kind of bringing a more context into the conversation. So starting when they're really young, we're going to name things. We're going to take shame away from it. It's just another part of the body. As they age, you're going to start talking about things that are more appropriate, right? Different scenarios, educate them about pictures, how to talk to you, how to come to you and start those conversations. And again, when they have the terminology, that all becomes way easier. But also just saying like, hey, if somebody ever shows you something that makes you uncomfortable, you can always come to me and tell me about that thing. Then as they get older and they start to come into puberty, you're going to educate them ahead of time, preferably, about their body changes. So, how their body is going to change and develop, things about periods, things about having feelings of sexuality, all of that. And again, sort of bringing in that terminology from before, that this is normal, that God made you this way, that there's nothing wrong with it, but then also creating context when certain things might be appropriate, and things of that nature. And then as they get older too, specifically having conversations around masturbation and your thoughts around that, and when things might be appropriate or not appropriate, and that would be family to family.
I was thinking about what you were saying, and one of the big moments of wounding in my life was watching that Inappropriate movie with my parents and their friends. And so whatever I was, 10, 11 years old. And as you're talking about it, what's really interesting to me, and I was thinking about had I been given some context on this, I would have been okay. But I remember feeling very ashamed, right? Because I was aroused as a young boy. I had nobody. I thought everybody noticed that I was aroused, right? I was just sitting on the couch, right? And I felt deep shame over it. But nothing, I had to process that all by myself, right? I never talked to anybody. So how do you make sense of that as a 9 or 10-year-old, right? It was just really, really difficult, right, to kind of figure that out. And so that's a good example where you could help, like if, like somebody could have helped me, my mom or my dad could have been like, okay, let me explain to you why you were aroused. And let me explain to you why that's okay. And then, you know what I mean? Now, granted, there's a lot of other stuff going on there, but I mean, I think about that deep shame that I carried for decades, right? Over that. And so it's just a good example, a kind of a practical from my life example of what you could argue was a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I took a message out of that situation that harmed me for many, many, many years.
Well, and I think the other side to that for any parents listening is please be careful with what is on the television or media that is in the house that your children have access to. Because sometimes we think, oh, they're playing in the background or whatever. But if there's a sex scene, if there is, it doesn't even have to be a sex scene. There could be other things that are sexual, right? Or even some kids are really sensitive to fear or scary things that are happening. And so sometimes it can be really easy to forget as an adult living in an adult world with an adult brain how sensitive young brains are and how much they absorb. And I had, I think we both had experiences when we were young that sort of maybe registered on a level where as adults we're not forgetting, right? And so maybe this can be a gentle reminder for parents out there, like let's be careful and proactive about what you're listening to on the radio or what you have on your TV or things that your kids can hear in the house. Again, we want the exposure to come from safe places so that can really that can really lay the foundation for them of the exposure being educational, being safe, not being something that's creating shame or embarrassment for them, but it just becomes like, okay, these are normal parts of my body. These are normal responses that my body has, things like that. And then if they do get exposed, they have context, they have awareness. If they get uncomfortable about something, they can come to you and talk to you about it. But what you just explained that's really hard is if we are the people that expose our children to something uncomfortable, because then they might not feel as safe bringing it up because they think you're okay with it.
Yeah.
So if my parents are okay with it, then maybe I shouldn't feel this way. And if I shouldn't feel this way, then maybe I shouldn't tell them that I feel this way.
Yeah, my parents are telling me what to do on a regular basis. They are guiding me. They just had me watch this movie. So now what,
so just being careful with all of that. So kind of within this concept of age appropriate and age ranges, there was another question that came in just around this topic of like, why are modesty conversations always focused on women? This is a parent of a young boy, and she gave an example of when her young child sees other men, like in the summertime or when it's hot out, without shirts on, and asking, well, why don't they have a shirt on, right? And she has responded, or maybe he has said, or something like this, that well, it's okay for men, but it's not okay for women. And so that kind of like got our wheels turning about the modesty message for boys and kind of how to communicate this and things of that nature. And, it's true, right? Like it is okay for guys to have their shirt off, and it's not really okay for women to have their shirt off. But, kind of bringing this question in, like, is there more context we can provide or different conversations we can have around that sort of thing? So one of the things that I thought about is maybe even just different terminology. The way it is true, right? Like you can totally just say that and leave it at that. But you could even, if you're bringing in the terminology from a young age about naming the body parts, you could even say, well, women's breasts are considered private parts, right? And we've talked about that. And so those are generally kept covered, but men don't have private parts on their top, right? And their nipples aren't considered sexual.
Right. But you also notice that your penis is covered up because that's considered private. And so, men are different than women in this regard. And so
the bodies are different.
Right. The bodies are different. And this is how, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Oh yeah, sure does. And then you go back.
But even just the way you said that, right? Like, well, there's a little bit of a difference in the way our bodies are made here, and just sort of reiterating that that's really normal and that's okay. And there's nothing to be ashamed about for either body, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you could even take it to the example, so here's a good example. Have you ever gone to a swimming pool and you notice that the girls have maybe like a two-piece suit that covers, the top part and the bottom part, and you and the boys just get to, go around like that. That's why, you know what I mean? So like bikini tops are okay, because sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, shoulders, you know what I mean? It gets into that too. It's like, no, it's really about that one particular part.
Yeah.
It's not shoulders, it's, and stuff like that.
So as we're kind of throughout all of these conversations, I think probably what you're hearing is that there are a lot of little conversations that you can have interspersed just as a normal part of life throughout your kid's life as they age. And again, there's no time that's too late to start, right? And the older it gets, the more awkward that first conversation might be, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's still important to have. And you can kind of lay the foundation of saying, hey, I would love to have more conversations like this with you. And I would love to create a relationship that feels more safe. And actually, asking for feedback as a parent is not a bad thing. It's a
huge.
very vulnerable thing. It's a really scary thing to say, hey, like I sent that text to Keegan, and thankfully he was really nice back. He didn't actually say too much that was negative. I don't think he said anything that was negative. But part of me is like, well, like I'm sure there's something that you could have replied and said, well, you did say this and that kind of wasn't helpful in this area, but then you also said this and that was right. But being willing to ask for feedback and saying like, hey, like, especially if you're starting these conversations later in their high school years, like, is there anything I can do to help you feel safe having these conversations with me?
Right.
That could be a really great question to ask.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like 6 months ago or something, King was home. And I think I had asked him something like that. Like, hey, is there anything that you would want from me as your mom that I'm not giving you right now? Or something along those lines. Like, how could I be a better parent? Like, is there anything?
Yeah.
So I think those questions are okay to ask because it's interesting with Keegan. He doesn't necessarily pull out the negative, but he did reiterate like what he liked about our relationship. So even just whether it's something that they say, well, this kind of makes me uncomfortable, or if they say, well, I really like this, that can still be helpful because one of the things that he said was, well, you check in all the time, and I can't remember. I think he said like I send him memes or whatever. Like I send him cat videos. So basically, he was like, you communicate, you check in, like you're staying in communication with me, basically, right?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, well, that means something to him. So that even just having that as an answer, I was like, okay, because as a parent, you text your kids and like you may or may not get a reply.
Yeah, right. How's
For
it
like
going?
a week.
What's happening?
You might get a one-word reply, or you might get a reply in a week, or maybe never. So even just hearing that's like, okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna still send him cat videos on Instagram because eventually, when he looks at it, I know that he likes it.
Right. Well, and I was thinking about this. I made the mistake of reading him. I took him through Conquer. He and I went through Conquer, the 10 lesson things, and I made the mistake of reading him my full therapeutic disclosure that I had read you during our process. And that was very detailed, very graphic. And he was probably close to 17, if not 17 at that point, because it was about a year in. And it was certainly a mistake. And I will tell you it was a mistake. It was too much information for him to hear. And that night was a hard one for all of us, right? And it was just the mistake I made. But here, and this is the thing I want to encourage you as parents, my intent behind that was to educate him. I loved him.
And to be vulnerable.
And to be vulnerable with him. I wanted to lead with vulnerability, kind of the wrong way to do it. But I remember talking to him later about it when the dust had kind of settled down. He said, Dad, I needed to hear that. I needed to hear what the consequence could be. I needed to understand what the outcome could be as if you go into that. And I think it's, they used to have this program where they would take like 12-year-olds and take them to a prison. And they yell at them, like called Scared Straight or something like that.
It did scare him straight.
Yeah, it did. I mean, and I wasn't trying to scare him. Once again, my whole intention was honorable.
Can I make a clarification here? So I don't think that the majority of what you shared was wrong to share.
Yeah.
I think because you read from the disclosure, there were too many details in it. Right. But I think had you shared the pillars of the behavior, like for example, I would not shy away from telling your 17 or 18-year-old child that it was pornography or that it was cyber sex or that it was an affair. Like I would use, again, with terminology, I would use the honest, accurate terminology for what happened. Now, what was in our disclosure was like listing out websites and like different details that like did not need to be shared to get the point across. Yeah. But when we're saying details aren't needed, what we're not saying is, we're not saying avoid the actual honest. I think it's fine. I think it's actually very important that our kids get the truth.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that was really scary to him that night is, and this is another thing that like kids hear stuff, right? But people always tell him that he and I are carbon copies. People are like, oh, you're such a carbon copy of your dad, or he's a carbon copy. So he thought, well, this is going to be my life. Mm-hmm. And as he was able to process through it. So it was very scary to him. Mm-hmm. But as he was able to process through, he was able to differentiate between my life, his life. Right. And then it equipped him with a level of knowledge that helped him as he moved forward in his end of high school, college timeframe.
Yep. So again, as they get older, through high school, a little bit later in high school, and let's just sort of assume we've already been through all of the steps already, it's going to be less foundational, right? We're not going to talk to our 16, 17, 18-year-olds about naming their body parts, right? It's going to be more about checking in with them, right? You've already had the birds and the bees conversation, the intimacy conversation, the sex conversation. You've already had all of those things, right? And I would rewind just for a minute because we didn't spend too much time on this, but don't hesitate to educate about the body changes and what's coming and different feelings or experiences they might have. And don't hesitate to share maybe your personal experiences with that to, lead with vulnerability and truth and honesty. A lot of us, myself included, were not educated before something happened. And then you are left to sort of figure it out. And sometimes that can be very traumatic. Other times it's just like, oh, haha, that's a funny story, right? But just letting people know ahead of time. It's better to be ahead of the game as opposed to late. And puberty is happening at different ages for the kids now. It tends to be a little bit earlier for a lot of kids. So it is a little bit...
I think especially for girls.
Especially for girls. So it's a little bit, it's very advisable to talk to them early about what's going to happen in their future. And then, not just one conversation when they're 8, but like check in again. Like maybe it's an annual thing until it happens or something, right? But it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
And then as they get older and you get past these conversations about their bodies changing and sex, and now you're going to bring it into more adult conversations, right? About connecting, about relationships. Kids in high school are going to get serious. They're going to have all these hormones raging. They're going to be thinking about sex. Their friends have talked to them about sex. They've been exposed to stuff at this point. Like there's almost no way that you're getting to 16, 17, or 18. You haven't seen something, heard something, been exposed to something inappropriate. And then you're having these connections and these feelings and these relationships that can lead you down a lot of paths. And so making sure that you're having open conversations around that and just trying really, really hard. You may have a set of moral values or ethics that, your family espouses, but always going back to sharing with your kids, I love you no matter what. If you make a different decision, I'm going to share with you why I think this is important and why this is going to help you. And I hope that you always come to me. And I want you to know, and I really mean that, I want you to come and tell me anything, because I want you to know if you make a decision that is different than what I am sharing as the quote unquote best decision, I will still love you. And I think that's really, really important.
There's so many avenues where that actually really works. And so, like, what is it? The hey, if you are 16 years old and you go to a party and you get drunk and you need a ride home, call me. I'll come get you. And as long as you call me and I come get you,
Keegan did that a couple times.
Yeah.
Not getting drunk at a party. He didn't drink until later, but
right.
Weren't there a couple times where he reached out and he was like, hey, can you come get me? Like, I don't want to be here.
I can't quite remember, but I think you might be right. So it's like, the point is like, I guess where I'm coming from is having an open, having the ability to have an open conversation. The depth of the degree of influence on your child is governed by the depth of the relationship. And so, how you approach sex conversations are going to help you as you approach drinking conversations, and how you approach marijuana conversations. I don't know if marijuana is legal; it's not that big of a deal or whatever. But my whole point is like this panoply of things that is very hard on kids.
Yeah.
That even goes beyond sex. These same things actually help that. You can kind of talk to, you can have these vulnerable, and part of healing after, sex addiction and betrayal trauma is developing your emotional intelligence, right? You really grow that emotional intelligence and your ability to be empathetic with people while they're kind of moving through things. And kids have a lot to deal with. They really, really do have a lot to deal with.
And the challenge is, how do you become the safe person? Especially if there's probably every single parent at some period of time between the ages of 14 and 18 is going to butt heads with their kids with either behavior or ideological differences or moral choices that they're probably going to do something that you think is like fundamentally wrong. And so the question is really, how do you become the person that they come to, and you create a safe enough space, again, where they know that they're loved. And you made that comment about the parties too. I think that's a really, really, really great example of like laying this, like, we're going to have our own language. Like if you text me this word, I will not ask questions. I will just come get you. So having like a safe word where if they find themselves in a position where maybe they do feel embarrassment or they do feel guilt or they know they did something wrong or whatever it is, or maybe they weren't doing anything wrong, but they're surrounded by people doing things that they don't want to do, right? That you are the extraction. Like you will get them out of there and you will do it in a way that is safe, that's not going to immediately jump to conclusions, but will get curious and ask them questions.
Yeah, I'm always the lifeline. I'm always there for you. I'm going to help. I'm going to help bail you out. You know what I mean? Within reason, right? You know, as far as
And I think that's a really great idea. Like the safe word of like, if you use this, like I need you to know my response will be very safe.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. You know, again, we do of course want to educate why waiting for sexual relationships may be beneficial for them. But again, always letting them know that like it's okay to come if you ever make a different decision. We want to make sure that you still feel safe to talk to us about it, and just having conversations around, you know, when you're talking about pornography, when you're talking about being in relationships, talking about like how your brain works and how, you know, you might see something like a picture that a friend shows you and you might feel really curious about that. Or you might be around your significant other in high school and you might feel sexually aroused. And like, what does that mean? And how do you engage in self-control? You know, maybe you teach your kid breathing techniques. You know what I mean? Maybe you, maybe you kind of walk them through like what works in order to stop pathways that you don't want to go down without feeling shame that thing happened. Like it's a normal, natural thing to be in a relationship and want to be closer to someone. So normalizing all the physiological experiences, normalizing the hormonal experiences, normalizing the brain experiences, and then just teaching them like, how do you move through situations to make decisions that you align with? So you don't find yourself in a situation that you might not feel good about the next day.
Yeah.
Anything else that you have thoughts about around there? And I think, again, you can't check in too much. Well, let me say that. You can probably if it's like every day, but but I mean like as they age, right? Like Keegan does not live in the house and we still try to ask him questions about this and we still try to check in. Now, how much he wants to tell us, you know, it obviously is up to him, but we're really trying to make sure that he knows that we are always open. We are always interested. And if he makes a decision that is different than the one he's told us he's going to make in the past, we still want him to feel safe coming to us and telling us that.
I always make it a point to tell him when you and I are doing something pretty cool related to recovery work. And so, for example, we hopped on a call yesterday with my West Point class and talked about our story. And so I mentioned that to Keegan on Thursday or Friday. He was like, "Oh, that's really brave." He said, "That's really brave." And then he said, he goes, you know, they need to talk about it more in the Army. And he made this, it was an interesting conclusion because he was like, you know, a leader is not going to be as effective as they need to be if they're addicted to pornography or looking at pornography. And I was like, I 100% agree with you. Like he understands the relationship there. He understands what it means to his professional life, right? And you know, he wants to be the best leader he can be. And it's true. It's like it, you know, if beyond your marriage, you stunt your range of motion when you're addicted to these things because it affects you relationally.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
He's so smart.
Yep.
Okay, so we're just going to wrap it up with some quick concepts about how can we talk about sex. So obviously there's levels of discomfort, but let me pause here and just say, if I could just record a 52-minute so far podcast saying all of these words out loud and talking about these concepts, you can too, because 5 years ago, a lot of this would not have come out of my mouth. So this is, that was something I was going to mention earlier that I think I forgot to mention is when it comes to our own stuff, part of working through things might just be repeating things over and over and over and over and over and over. Because the first time, you know, when everything came out with you and I was asking questions and I said masturbation, it was like a lump in my throat and my face got red and it was like the most gross, disgusting. Like it was so hard for me to like say the word right out loud, the proper word, right? So when you say it over and 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 over again, it doesn't bother you anymore.
That's right.
So you can just practice it. So how can we talk about sex? So we want to focus on what is good as the foundation. So again, sort of like we were talking about when you're sharing about body parts and how people are made, we want to do that with sex too. I think a lot of times we sort of avoid the conversation, or we talk about what's bad if it's misused, right? And so what we want humans to be instilled with is this idea that it's a beautiful, wonderful thing, that it comes from a place of emotional intimacy, and it's a growth of emotional intimacy. It's an outpouring of emotional intimacy that builds on that, and that we kind of communicate, the safety limits and all of the parameters that can make it a really wonderful thing. But it's like the idea of sharing you want to focus on the good part heavily, so that it doesn't turn into the only time I hear about sex is when it's a shameful, dirty thing, or it's bad or it has consequences. So we do want to avoid shaming language around sexuality itself or around bodies as much as we can. Sometimes we might make a mistake because we might learn something, or we might find ourselves making a comment about something. And so again, we always want to check ourselves, do some self-reflection, apologize to our kids if we say something out of turn.
Correct what you've said.
Correct what you've said. So we want to avoid shaming language as much as we can. And I think too, if we did something like that in this context, it's okay to say, hey, I'm learning too, and I'm really trying to reshape my thinking around some of these things, and I'm trying to help you have an easier time with this than I did. Empower your kids to use their voice and to always feel safe coming to you when they feel weird or funny or embarrassed about something. And then help them practice what to say if they need to tell you they're uncomfortable.
Just to be clear on this, because sometimes people still have they may listen to our podcast and they may listen to the healing messages, but they still have some weird behaviors. So telling them, hey, listen, don't be embarrassed when you come to me, all right? That's an order. Like, don't be embarrassed. You will come to me and tell me what, this is really where you have to approach with open arms, and you have to be soft.
What would help you feel safe to come to me?
That's right.
How I would like to develop these conversations.
Yeah.
But I know it's been really awkward in the past. Do you have any ideas?
Is there a spot in the house that's easier to talk about it? Is there?
I've heard too, we were just talking about the high school party safe word kind of thing. I've heard where parents will create a safe zone, like let's say it's a 30-minute conversation once a week, and you guys basically sit down in a let's pick a spot in the house. We're going to imagine that there's an orb around this space, and for 30 minutes you can tell me anything, ask me any questions, whatever happens, you're not going to get in trouble. There will be no judgment. There's not going to be any consequences for anything you tell me in this space. Yeah. And it's that invitation of, you have the floor. What do you need to get off your chest?
Right. The other thing, I developed this while he was still, I still kind of do it. If there's a difficult conversation I have to have, think about it. You open Keegan's desk was right by the door to his room. So you open the door, you're standing there as a parent, right? They're sitting or they're on their bed, right? So you're higher than them. And so that's a position of authority, right? So and then you start talking, that might be harder to do if you maybe change that and come and sit next to them on the bed. So I would sit on his bed and he would swivel his chair around and we would talk. And actually at that point I was lower than him, right? So it creates a different dynamic there. So it's, be aware of those kinds of things.
Yeah. All right, we're going to wrap it up really quickly with some resources. These are all going to be attached in the show notes, but we've mentioned these books: God Made All of Me, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex. And then I didn't mention this one, but it's going to be included in the show notes: The Good Girl's Guide to Sex. That's by Sheila Gregor. She does a lot of research about sexuality and women, specifically in faith communities. So she's putting out new information regularly, and then she's also gone in specifically with this book and redone it with her new education. And then there are 2 educational courses that I would highly recommend. One was the parent training course that I just went through from Pure Desire. And so again, a lot of these concepts we've pulled from them. So it would be good it's 8 I want to say 10 videos, maybe 20 to 30 minute videos. They have some educational concepts. Then they have like a young, like a maybe high school age girl she'll say, hey, I encourage you to do da 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 da, or some of her perspective. And then they'll have some experts speak on the topic as well. So you're going to get a lot of reiteration about several things, these things over and over, some stories, some examples. Highly recommend that. And then the other one that I actually discovered through the parent training course was by Kristen Miel, and she created a course called Sex Ed Reclaimed. And I actually haven't had the opportunity to go through this, but whenever she was talking in the parent training course, I was like, oh, she's good. And so I wanted to look this up, but she has a whole course about Sex Ed Reclaimed. And so that may be even more, the parent training course is like for the parents, right? Sex Ed Reclaimed is, I think, going to go maybe even more in depth in terms of some of the, as your kids age, and if they're getting sex ed in the schools, what's the sex ed that you want to bring them, right? And so I would definitely check out both of those. We're going to have all of these resources and some of the previous podcast episodes listed in the show notes as well. So lots and lots of links. Go check them out.
Awesome. Good job.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, I hope that was helpful. We really kind of covered a lot today. It is a little bit of a longer episode, but like I said, we've made a lot of mistakes, and we really want to help you make less. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. We will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.